completely, entirely.
Yep.
It's a challenge for the entire humanity. I have never predicted things like that. By the way, have you got vaccine? Any kind of vaccine? All of you?
My second dose is on Friday. Tomorrow.
Friday.
Yeah, tomorrow.
Great.
My second dose, and
we have together, my spouse Olga and myself. We have already done it.
Good.
At the end of January. It's
wonderful.
Sputnik V, 2 stages.
Are the Russian people very good about wearing their masks and staying apart from each other?
No. They, unfortunately, in the public transportation system, because I frequently use buses or metro stations, metro system, to the best of my knowledge, more than 95% neglect wearing protective masks, and 99% abstain for having gloves on the hands. That's not good, because this is the simplest way and very effective. Very effective. Though in the metro, for example, there are a lot of kind of sanitation equipment, like desodorant, having some specific chemical that
hand sanitizer.
Sanitizer. Yes, thank you very much, David. Sanitizer. Every station refilled, etc., etc. But quite seldom people use them.
Well, here it's become a really political thing that people they don't want to be told what to do. And I mean, Trump started that by refusing to even acknowledge that it was a problem. And then it's become a political thing that, generally speaking, right-wing people don't want to wear them. And I don't understand how it's political, but it has become that.
It's a humanitarian issue.
Absolutely.
A medical issue. It's the level of health care for the entire planet. Look what's going on in India. Horrible things. Yes.
Well, it just shows, what are the common threats to us are nuclear weapons and pandemics and climate change. It's not, that's what we need to get rid of, all those problems. And yeah.
Got my name tag.
Well, look, okay. Rank and file people. Okay, thank you very much, David.
In case you don't know my name.
Yeah.
Jeez, nice.
Well, David and I were both delegates on Sharon's one of Sharon's trips. So we have good memories of our trips there.
With Vladimir spoke to our group on Sharon.
Yes, us too.
Yes. I have already spoken 3 times already, or 4 times already. And during this year, Sharon has invited me to speak again. But I don't know what will be the situation with this pandemic.
Right.
I hope to be on that trip, depending what happens.
Yeah, because look, I'm sorry for interrupting you.
No, go ahead.
Okay. Yep. No, look, despite all protective measures and despite a lot of money the government pours on to combat this pandemic disease, each day in the Russian Federation as a whole, around 8,000 people are infected with COVID-19, and about 2,000 in Moscow alone. No, because it's a rather big city. And many people do not understand the negative consequences of being poisoned with this highly virulent disease. Because I have a number of friends who died unexpectedly because of pneumonia probably in English, right? Yeah, pneumonia. Yes, because this specific type of pneumonia can destroy the body of the infected person within 4 hours. 4 hours, very quickly, if this person lost the time to appeal to doctors, to physicians, to take some specific medicines. So very quickly, it's not like a simple, ordinary seasonal flu.
Right, of course, right.
Yeah.
Now,
It's very dangerous.
Are your hospitals overworked, or are there plenty of room?
No. Even at the height of the number of infected persons, like 22,000 per day, we had many thousands of beds in hospitals with specific equipment, and the government and civilian branch, as well as military people, helped a lot to build, so to say, SNAP hospitals. SNAP, quickly build
pop up. We call them pop up.
Yeah. Pop up.
You pop up, yeah, like that.
Pop up. Yes, like uncorking the bottle, right? Yes, yeah. Very quickly, right. So, and nowadays they are reducing the number of such hospitals because they are irrelevant, such a great numbers. And we have already made 35 million doses of 4 types of vaccine. Today, Sputnik Light has been registered officially and can be used. It's a part of Sputnik V, a broad-based vaccine. As I said, it has two doses, 2 parts, 2 components. But Sputnik Light has only 1 component. It's especially needed for those who have already had this disease, I mean COVID-19, and for persons who does not need the full spectrum of Sputnik V completely. So,
do you think?
And we have been Sorry.
Do you think that Russia and China sharing vaccines with other countries played a role in Joe Biden finally deciding to support waiving patent restrictions on vaccines?
Well, yes, I know that the People's Republic of China is supplying its own vaccine to a number of countries. I do not know their names. But as to the Russian Federation, more than 60 nations all over the world have agreed either to buy our vaccine or to produce it together at their own countries, using their own equipment. So as a kind of license. And we do not have any political prejudices, because this is the global disease.
It's a humanitarian problem, not a
planetary humanitarian disease.
Exactly.
And the aid assistance should be channeled very quickly, especially to those nations and countries in need.
Absolutely.
Badly needed. And for us, we do not care what are political implications, what people are thinking about us or about our disease. Those who would like to have it, please go ahead. Please go ahead.
Just want to note that
we will do that. Sorry, David. Okay, please.
Just want to note that we're 5 minutes out. In less than 5 minutes, I'm going to let everybody in and introduce and start. And also want to note that Sharon is here with us, and I've made you, Sharon, and Vladimir.
39 persons, yes, have registered. Yes, arrived to come.
Just want to note that I've made you, Leah, Sharon, Ray, and Vladimir co-hosts, which means that you can mute and unmute. And so I think Leah and Sharon and I, when we're not talking, we'll mute and remember to unmute if we want to talk. Everybody else will be unable to unmute until Leah gives them that special permission to ask a question. So we won't be hearing from them until questions and answer time. So I'll introduce Ray. He'll say something. I'll introduce Vladimir. He'll say something. I'll see if the two of you want to ask each other anything. I'll ask you some questions, and then we'll go to questions from all of these people, one by one.
Clear. Well accepted, David. You say thank you very much.
Good. And
David. Okay, David. And while I arrange my remarks, I will ask you, please turn the next slide, please, next slide, etc. But my suggestion from myself and to myself is to concentrate more on questions, either from you or from the audience.
Yes,
because this is much more important part of our discussion. But the slides I have sent, and feel free to disseminate them. They can be used later, so I will be very quick. Like it will be like a bullet points.
Great. And when we get to 90 minutes, do we want to cut it off and stop if there's still a lot of people asking a lot of questions? Do we want to go longer or not?
Well, it's up to you. I can physically sustain any time.
We can
go a marathon question.
No problem. It depends on your facilities, on your ability, on your just timetable. So go ahead as you wish.
Do you concur? Ray, do you want to go a little bit longer if people are still asking lots of questions?
Sure. Yeah, I am physically up to it almost as much as Vladimir.
We don't doubt it.
But what I would like to ask you, just ask the esteemed audience to put one question and one answer. One question and answer, one by one.
Not three at once.
Too many questions, because sometimes I'm not an 18 years old boy. Sometimes I forget what was the question number one when there have been 50 questions.
Yes. Okay.
So,
do
one by one. It will be perfect. Straight question, straight answer.
Terrific.
I'll do one from me, and then one from me, and then see how many it makes sense, and then one from John and one from Mary.
Well, I'm flexible. It's up to you to decide. No problem.
Someone may have to help Leah with calling on some of these people whose names are in Russian, but I'll let Leah worry about that.
Oh, I didn't even think about that. All right.
So I'm going to admit everybody from the waiting room, and then I'm going to turn off the waiting room and admit anybody who snuck in the seconds there, and then we won't have a waiting room. People will be able to just join up. So,
David, you know what? If their name is in Russian, ask them to put their question in the chat. So that way you'll be able to read the first part of the question. They'll know they're being called on, because I won't know how to say their name otherwise. So if it's in the chat, then you...
Okay.
I'll ask. Yeah. If we can't call on them, we'll. There's likely to be only one or two people with their hand raised at a given moment, and you can say the person whose name I can't pronounce. But,
okay. All right. I won't worry about it.
I'm gonna click admit all, and they're gonna start coming in.
138.
And I'm going to turn off the waiting room.
Do you remember how many registered, David?
600 some.
600 people registered, and you usually get about half of what registered. So I would expect a lot more than this. There's Matt Ho. You're going by quickly.
Welcome, everyone. We'll be starting in just a second here. Matt says hi in the chat, Leah.
Yeah.
We're at 158 and rising, so we'll start in just a few minutes here, maybe 1 minute.
Ray, am I right that you have never met Vladimir before? This is your first time to be introduced?
Well, I was with Sharon about 5 or 6 years ago, and I think just before Vladimir was hired on, so to speak, to give that presentation. So I really don't remember for sure, but I think this is the first time we've met.
Well, we've certainly been in touch by email. He helped us with this petition to the nuclear nations and other things. So, no, I thought I had. I don't know why there's still a waiting room when the waiting room is supposed to be turned off, but we're at 185 and rising, so we'll start within the next minute.
Do you have to just keep opening up the waiting room? People are in there until you open it again? You just have to keep periodically opening it?
There shouldn't be a waiting room anymore, and there's only one person in it, and everybody else is just coming straight into the.
Okay, good.
Let's see if when we top 200, we'll start. How about that?
That sounds good. Yeah, ask people to put what country they're from in the chat so we can see how many countries we get. That would be interesting.
Well, there's 200 messages I need to wade through now. Okay. Well, welcome everyone. We're going to go ahead and get started. People are still joining. My name is David Swanson. I'm the executive director of World Beyond War, among other things. We have with us helping out, making this webinar work, this conversation happen, Leah Bolger, who's the president of our board at World Beyond War. She'll be taking questions from you all later through the raise hand trick where you click on reactions and then click on raise hand and it gives a little raised hand symbol. No need to do that yet, but when we get to the questions and answers section, you can do that. And I will be taking your questions through the chat, and you can put them there at any time that the most pressing questions occur to you that you think won't be answered in the course of events. Put them in the chat and I'll ask them of Vladimir or Ray. We are very privileged to have with us Ray McGovern and Vladimir Kozin, who will be speaking shortly. And I want to thank both World Beyond War and the Center for Citizen Initiatives and Sharon Tennyson, with whose group some of us have had the privilege of traveling from the United States to Russia in years gone by and in years ahead as well, I hope. So I'm going to introduce Ray, and he's going to speak briefly with some illustrations, and then the same with Vladimir. And then I'm going to ask them some questions. They may want to ask each other some questions, and then we're going to take questions from all of you. And so Ray McGovern came to Washington, D.C. from his native Bronx in New York City in the early 60s as an Army infantry / intelligence officer. And he actually is intelligent, unlike some intelligence officers. And he served as a CIA analyst for 27 years, from the administration of John F. Kennedy to that of George H.W. Bush. Ray's duties included chairing national intelligence estimates and preparing the president's daily brief, which he briefed one-on-one to President Ronald Reagan's 5 most senior national security advisors from 1981 to 1985. In January of 2003, Ray co-created Veteran Intelligence Professionals for Sanity, VIPS, to expose how intelligence was being falsified to justify war on Iraq. As an act of conscience, on March 2nd, 2006, Ray returned the Intelligence Commendation Medallion given him at retirement for especially meritorious service, explaining, quote, "I do not want to be associated, however remotely, with an agency engaged in torture." Ray's opinion pieces have appeared in many leading newspapers and other publications in the United States and abroad. Welcome, Ray McGovern. I will share your PowerPoint for everyone.
Thank you, David. Will I be able to see the PowerPoints? There they are. Okay, I was telling Vladimir before that we have an expression in America called age before beauty. And I think that's why I'm allowed to go first here. Clearly, I'm aged. And as far as beauty is concerned, Vladimir has me hands down, so to speak. I thought I'd set the stage from my own personal experience with these strategic matters. And from 1970 on, I was chief of the Soviet Foreign Policy Branch, and we were deeply involved in negotiations, supporting negotiations for the first SALT, the Strategic Arms Limitation Treaty, which was signed in Moscow in May of 1972, and I was privileged to be there at that signing. Our role was to tell the President Nixon at the time, whether we thought Russians were serious about strategic arms limitations. Our answer was yes, we thought they were serious. Our second question to us was, can you verify that they would comply with the agreement that we reached? And we said, well, how soon do you need to know? And they said, well, how about 2 weeks? And we said, yes, we can verify that. In other words, it was not Ronald Reagan to say, doveraj, no proveraj, how's that go? Trust but verify. It was Nixon. So we played a real role in this. And from my personal experience, you have to realize that I was born before World War II. And after World War II, I was one of those people who hid under my desk at school so that the radiation wouldn't get me from Russian atomic bombs, okay? In other words, we were that naive, we thought we'd be protected. In any case, I was very, very worried about the prospect of a nuclear exchange. And that's why, from a personal point of view, when I was there in 1972, there was immense elation and relief that finally we and the Russians had come to an agreement which would pretty much rule out a first strike capability. Now, if you look on the chart there, first strike, of course, that amounts to trying to hit the other side and avoid retaliation immediately. Now, the ABM treaty, by limiting the number of ABM sites, anti-ballistic missile sites, automatically precluded either the Russians or the Americans from thinking that they could do a first strike and escape immediately, immediate destruction. We did the rigorous monitoring. Did anyone cheat? Well, yes, the Soviets cheated. We found out in 1987 that they were building a prohibited ABM facility in a place called Krasnoyarsk, way out there in Siberia. We called them on it. In those days, even under Reagan and Bush, we tended to negotiate rather than flail out publicly. The negotiations took place. The Russians dismantled that ABM facility that had been prohibited by the treaty. That's the way things go. You can monitor. Even now, our sophisticated monitoring systems are even more accurate than before. So that's part of the calculus here. Could we do a new treaty? Of course we could. Could we modify it? Could we monitor it and make sure no one is cheating? Yes, we could. Now, after Bush got out of the ABM treaty, Bush and Cheney, they started, actually several years later under Obama, ABM systems started to be imported or exported into places like Poland, places like Romania, and on ships in the Black Sea. My former, Robert Gates used to work for me in the early 70s. He later became much more famous than I. And one of the things he said about putting these missiles on ships in the Black Sea was, I never cared about making the Russians happy. Okay? Well, he should have cared about making the Russians fearful. but he didn't. So Poland, Romania, and Mr. Putin, 5 years ago, complained to a whole bunch of Western correspondents, look, we know what those ABM systems are for. They're not to prevent missile attacks from Iran, which, number one, has no nuclear weapons, and number two, does not have the rockets, the missiles able to deliver them. We know what they're for. They're the same holes that can be retrofitted and put in cruise missiles, which would attack our offensive capabilities, and people would be tempted to do a first strike. That's what Mr. Putin said to these Western journalists. And their reaction was, this infuriated Mr. Putin. And all the time, during this time, the Russians were building up their, maybe have the next slide, please. The Russians are building up their own capability. Now, on March 1st, 2018, in a major speech, Mr. Putin claimed not only strategic parity, but in some respects, particularly with respect to missiles and weapons that fly at Mach. Now, most people know Mach is the speed of sound, right? In my day, Mach 1 or Mach was pretty big. Now here we're talking about Mach 7, Mach 8. And these missiles are pretty much cannot be defended against. In other words, they render the ABM systems pretty much unnecessary and unneeded and not workable. And, you know, when he made this speech, of course, you had David Sanger and the other people in the New York Times getting their information from the intelligence officers. And they said, Putin just bluffing, just bluffing. Well, some of those weapons have been test fired since. I think that the Pentagon knows, and so does the CIA, that Mr. Putin is not bluffing, and they ought to take that very seriously. May we have the next slide, please? Now, things came to a head just a few weeks ago when it started when the Ukrainian President Zelensky at the end of March said, you know, we're going to take back Crimea and the Donbass, Donetsk and Luhansk. We're going to do that, and issued a formal decree on that, and then started sending Ukrainian troops eastward toward the Russian border. This was too much. This was too much for the Russians. And we know what happened. We know that there was great trepidation in the councils of NATO. And the Secretary General of NATO said on April 13th, beginning our little chronology here, my God, the Russians have 150,000 troops on the border of Ukraine. What are they going to do? Well, then they said, well, no, it's only 100,000 troops, but look what they're doing. Well, Mr. Shoigu, later that day, the defense minister for Russia said, yeah, you got that right. There are 2 full armies and 3 airborne formations. Yeah, we got them right on the border. Meanwhile, the deputy foreign minister, first deputy foreign minister, Ryabkov, warned. He said, look, you know, you're playing with fire here. You intend to send 2 guided missile destroyers into the Black Sea tomorrow? Forget about it. This would be a big risky opportunity for you to run afoul of our defenses. And so what happened that same day, those 2 guided missile destroyers were turned around and had repair problems, so they went to Cyprus. Now, later that day, same day, April 13th, our President Biden, got up and said, oh, the Russians are doing these terrible things, but let's have a summit. I mean, the incongruity of the kinds of defamation that he was doing and his proposal for, oh yeah, and meanwhile, let's have a summit to discuss all our bilateral issues. It was quite striking. But, you know, my analysis of that is that it was not Mr. Biden that took the initiative to call Mr. Putin. In the vernacular, I think Mr. Putin called Mr. Biden and left a voicemail, let's say, and saying, you better call me as soon as possible. You're playing with fire. The Russians like to let the Americans claim that they always take the initiative in calling their opposite number, the opposite president. So it doesn't matter to Putin. It did matter to Biden. So he called Putin, criticized him, and said, "Oh, let's have a summit." Well, about a week later, there was a denouement. Putin said, don't even think about our red lines. Our red line, of course, is Ukraine going into NATO, or Ukraine giving a bloody nose to our people, many of whom, millions of whom, are Russian citizens in the eastern Ukraine or in Crimea. So Shoigu, the next day, on April 22nd, says, okay, we're pulling back our troops because our objectives have been achieved. Next slide, please. Now, just to finish up on the Ukrainian flap, the Ukrainian almost war. In the background here, and this is something markedly different from 1972, when Russia and China were actually exchanging fire across their long border, the Russians and the Chinese are now together in what is virtually a military alliance. And so in the background of all this having to do with Ukraine, if US policymakers don't know that if there's a dust-up, if there are armed hostilities in Europe, they can fully expect a real saber rattling, or even worse, in the South China Sea or at the Taiwan Strait. That is what the old Soviets used to call the change in the correlation of forces. It is big, it is meaningful, and it's the background here which needs to be mentioned. Now, let's just switch gears for a second. In the annual threat assessment by the Director of National Intelligence, in this case, a woman named Avril Haines, there was a note of sanity. She started out saying that the main problem is climate change. And she said later, it cannot be addressed by one nation on its own. Now, this is the existential threat before all of us. What she is really saying is that we acknowledge, the intelligence community, as much as we hate our enemies or our competitors, we acknowledge that the real existential threat is something that we can't face alone, that our own military makes the biggest carbon footprint in the world, and that we have to get together with Russia, China, the others, to work on this together, or else it's all over for all of us. Now, that's big. And it seems to me that that's what we should emphasize here. If the existential threat is climate change, and we can't do it alone, and we need Russia, China, and India, and all those other countries to cooperate, we have to have a complete change in the way we look at things. And I would just simply say that we have to forego the mindset that we are the exceptional country in the world, the indispensable country in the world. You know, I ask my students when I lecture at universities, okay, do you know what synonyms are? And oh, sure, yeah, it's a like word, right? Like, okay, so do you know what an antonym is? And usually one of two says, yeah, that's the opposite word. I say, okay, so what's the opposite word for the one, not the exceptional, but the, what's the word here? The other one I used.
Indispensable, right?
Yeah. Indispensable. And so they struck their chins. Well, could it be dispensable? And I say, yeah, that's what we're saying to the rest of the world. You're all dispensable. We're indispensable. I just want to cite one dictum from President Putin that I happen to agree with. And I think Americans, if they thought about it, they would also agree with. This happened right after Mr. Putin helped Mr. Obama avoid an outright war with Syria. And he published this op-ed in the New York Times on September 11th, coincidence, 2013. This is what he said. My working and personal relationship with President Obama is marked by growing trust. I disagree, though, with the case he makes about American exceptionalism. He says that the United States policy is what makes America different. It makes us exceptional. Mr. Putin adds, it is extremely dangerous to encourage people to see themselves as exceptional, whatever the motivation. There are big countries and small countries, rich and poor, those with long democratic traditions and those still finding their way to democracy. Their policies differ too. We're all different, but when we ask for the Lord's blessings, we must not forget that God created us equal. I am reliably informed that Mr. Putin penned that last paragraph himself and tacked it on to the op-ed that the New York Times printed. Confirmation of that came in a later interview just 2 years ago, where Mr. Putin spontaneously said precisely the same thing. So what am I saying here? I'm saying here that we have to have a change, a metanoia, kind of a change in mind. And I would cite something that was recognized by President John F. Kennedy 58 years ago in his celebrated American University speech, where he said, a Pax Americana enforced by the weapons of war, not going to work. It's gone, okay? And that's what we have to forsake in view of this existential threat. We have to cooperate. We can't compete anymore. One more slide, please. Okay, now one way we could do this, and this is not pie in the sky, the UN has a treaty now that prohibits nuclear weapons. Now that's a sticky wicket, of course, because none of us that have nuclear weapons want to part with them. But you know, that's what we're going to have to do if we're going to survive on this planet. So there's an easy way to start this process. We can lead by example, to quote our president, and invest in life. Now, when I say invest, when you think about the trillions with a T, that are invested in nuclear war, nuclear modernization, so to speak, well, we could invest that in ways that would abet climate change, lickety-split, and all countries could do that. It would be the sensible thing to do, and not least, we would be saving life on this planet that we all share together. Thanks very much for your attention.
Thank you, Ray. Very well done. We are going to hear from Vladimir Kozin before further discussion and questions. And let me remind everyone that you can put questions at any time into the chat, and we will get to them when the time comes, or you can plan on using the raise hand function that you find usually under reactions, and then raise hand. Vladimir Kozin, we are very privileged to have with us today, is a member of the Russian Academy of the Natural Sciences and a member of the Russian Academy of Military Sciences, a member Scientific Council, Russian National Research Institute for Global Security, a member Expert Group, Foreign Relations Committee, Russian Senate, leading expert, Center of Military Political Studies, Moscow State Institute, University of International Relations. He graduated from the Moscow State Institute of International Relations in '72, a postgraduate course at the Diplomatic Academy of the Russian Foreign Ministry in '81, and the Royal College of Defense Studies in London in 1995. He is a holder of the PhD degree and the academic rank of a senior researcher. Kozin is also the author of 17 monographs on arms control and strategic stability. Vladimir Kozin, welcome, and I will share your PowerPoint.
Yes, David, well, thank you very much for your introduction and naturally for your very kind invitation to see all of you and to hear all of you and to answer your questions. Well, if you ask me in what way I assess the current military political situation between the United States of America and the Russian Federation, I would prefer to use quite simple words, but very alarming. The situation is dangerous, it's shaky, it is risky, and it's fraught with unheard of consequences. If you ask me, if the current situation reminds us the Cuban Missile Crisis of October 1962, I would say, oh yes, but only partially. Because currently, if you look at this map, you will see that during Cuban Missile Crisis, there were no strategic heavy bombers in Europe, only tactical nuclear weapons and delivery aircraft of medium range. There were no missile defense capabilities, both stored on board several Aegis system ships and on land, like in Romania and very soon to be completed in Poland. But nevertheless, we managed to bypass the Cuban Missile Crisis. What are our vision? What is going on with the United States of America, and especially in arms control and disarmament in terms of military preparations? In full swing, military preparations, completely deadlock in arms control, especially nuclear arms control and space-based systems. Next slide, please. David, next slide. Yeah, Ray mentioned the case that the Russians moved our troops very close to Ukrainian borders from Crimea and from the mainland Russia. But our composition of Russian troops were not so big as, for example, is imminent, and it will be used during Defender Europe 2021 for several months. By the way, our troops have been pulled back by the 1st of May. And if you compare a number of heavy military hardware, we had amassed 1,200 pieces of artillery, tanks, armored personnel carriers. But during Defender Europe this year, there will be 15,000 military hardware, etc. Next slide, please. We also are very much concerned about the potential appearance of the new type of nuclear gravity bomb. It's much more sophisticated than the previous family of the B series B61, and it's more accurate, and it will be deployed in Europe. And you will see that nuclear yield of this nuclear bomb varying and can be used as a low-key weapons, tactical nuclear weapons. Next slide, please. We also are concerned of the strategic non-nuclear capabilities because this kind of capabilities are not controlled by any international agreements because they are meant to be non-nuclear, conventional. Next slide, please. This is an alarming chart I have created both in English and in Russian. 12 international multilateral and bilateral treaties we are having, we either with the United States of America or with some other countries. Unfortunately, we have witnessed some either violations of this treaty or withdrawal, unilateral withdrawal of the United States, or desire not to ratify it, or even the refusal to debate. I will stop here and go further on. So please, next slide, if you may. Okay. there is insistence to involve the People's Republic China into bilateral negotiations with the United States of America and Russia. But look, these are figures I borrowed from Arms Control Association and from other experts of the United States. And the comparison between the US current nuclear arsenal and that of Chinese is 18 times as much higher in favor of the United States. That's why we understand that it would be very difficult to Beijing to join our club of negotiations, of the relevant negotiations. Next slide, please. Number 6. Yes, we are greatly concerned that after the demise of the INF Treaty, tore off in August 2019, there could be a new type of medium-range missiles, and the relevant contract hasn't been already signed. We are taking care that they could perform a strategic role. If strategic role is imminent, it means that they will be nuclear tipped, and both appear in Europe and in Asia Pacific region as well. Next slide, please. Outer space, a nice space, a nice domain. Many people are dreaming of keeping it safe, peaceful, and for all nations to be used on equal footing. Unfortunately, starting from launching Russian or Soviet Sputnik in '57 last century, there have been a number of agreements in the form of drafts and suggestions that have been put forward on the globe, but unfortunately we have not received any positive results on all these initiatives and suggestions. And the space policy of the current US administration inherited by President Joseph Biden from his predecessor, President Donald Trump, has specific features, and you may see next slide, please, number 9, David. Okay, this one, yeah, thank you. And the next slide, please. Okay, sorry, just that was my fault that I failed to mention the numbers. You will see what are specific features, and they create suspicion and mistrust between us. So some people say that the Cold War doesn't exist. From the point, next slide, please. From the point of political declaration, really it doesn't exist. But from realities, it really exists, and such a prominent person like Henry Kissinger also advocates this kind of notion. And there are specific features of the Cold War 2.0 or second variant from the Cold War 1.0. You may see it from this slide. Next slide, please. Next slide, okay. It will, no, it's number 10, okay. So practical suggestions. Practical suggestions will be followed later during my last slide, and I will stop there. Well, my predicament, I'm not pretending to be a Cassandra person who predicts something horrible, something dangerous. But look, it's true. Nuclear arms reductions process has stalled despite the extension of the new START by 2026. Chances for employment of nuclear weapons recent years recent decade have greatly increased. And if we borrowed a nuclear arms race age from 20th century, the current century could be a composition of 3 types of arms races: former nuclear, then missile defense arms race, and space arms race as well. And final brush, practical suggestions. Well, I announced them in 2016 in Athens, Greece, at the international conference, and they are valid to the best of my knowledge till now. Number one is we have to reach an agreement on mutual non-use of nuclear weapons in the first strike, no first use or no first strike, namely between the Russian Federation and the United States of America, and to formulate a mutually acceptable strategy called defensive nuclear deterrence that threatens no one. Ray was absolutely right when he mentioned a treaty on prohibiting nuclear weapons. But I believe, and our government believes, that it should be signed and ratified by all 9 declared or non-declared nuclear weapon states, not only by the United States of America and Russia, because we are not nuclear powers alone on our planet. So tactical nuclear weapons should be withdrawn from Europe, and new types of nuclear weapons of medium range should not stay in Europe indefinitely. Missile defense systems should also be pulled back from Europe, and a number of areas, geographical deployments, areas of missile defense should be also decreased. And there are some other points. For example, number 5, Baltic air policing is the most closest military air force operations of 15 NATO countries, called Baltic air policing, because it has 4 types of dual capable aircraft capable of carrying both conventional and nuclear weapons, including the bomb B-6112. So, and we should cancel and agree to cancel the policy of deploying space-based weapons in space, both of ASAT capabilities and satellite weapons, and space-based weapons directed against targets on Earth. So, and a new conference on security and cooperation in Europe should be convened at a time when it is appropriate for all nations concerned. Ray was absolutely right when he mentioned a potential summit between 2 presidents, President Biden and President Putin, somewhere in the future. But this kind of summit should be very well prepared. Simply sitting and to tell nice things to each other, it's not a business-like approach. The atmosphere for such summit should be reconsidered. It should be favorable. It should be favorable in terms of yielding positive and broad results. But if there is no positive atmosphere, when sanctions will continue to be, when economic sanctions, individual sanctions, when cliches like aggressor, etc., will continue to be articulated. So this summit better not to convene at all, because otherwise we will mislead the world community and mislead a lot of people who count very broadly and very positively on amelioration of the relationship between the Russian Federation and the United States of America, and between Russia and NATO alliance at large. Well, thank you very much. That is all. All my remarks are over. I will be happy to respond to your questions and remarks as well.
Excellent. Terrific, Vladimir. Thank you to Vladimir Kozin and to Ray McGovern. Let me address a couple of questions to each of you. And again, everyone can put their questions in the chat or plan to click raise hand when we get to that shortly. But let me just start with this question of sanctions and ask you about it, Ray, and then you, Vladimir. It seems the United States government believes it can impose sanctions on countries like Russia and Iran and North Korea and many others, and negotiate other matters as if those sanctions don't exist, while these other countries are screaming, end these horrible sanctions first, and then we'll talk to you. How do we get around this issue?
Well, it's my personal view, David, that if I were the president of the Russian Federation, God forbids, I would never sit at the negotiation table with a person who is imposing and will continue imposing sanctions, restrictions upon myself, or who would prefer to label me as ... using some kind of unpleasant words, not justifiable words. I would prefer to confer and to talk to a person who, like me, is going to reach fruitful, positive, beneficial results of practical nature, future-oriented, that would help other people all over the world believe that we have done a nice and positive job. But summits for the sake of shaking hands and arranging press conferences full of diplomatic language and promises. We have a lot of summits, but they have not been fruitful. They have not produced positive results. But we need results. I know that Americans people and other people all over the world are practical and business-like personalities. The same with us. The same with us. And that's why we rely on a very fruitful summit, absolutely free from intimidations, labels, tags, insults, sanctions, restrictions. If this summit will take place in this particular environment, I will be personally very much upset and will never support such summits at all. Thank you.
What do you think, Ray?
Well, I think Vladimir is absolutely right. If there's going to be a summit, it has to be well prepared, and there cannot be the acrimony that exists today. You know, it's totally confusing if you look at it without realizing what's going on. Here is Biden saying, oh, let's have a summit to discuss all our mutual or bilateral issues. And the next day or the day after, he imposes further sanctions on Russia. I mean, hello, if he really wants to summit, why would he be doing this? Well, the answer is pretty clear, I believe, to Mr. Putin and to the Kremlin leaders. And that is that Mr. Biden is not really in control of our government any more so than Mr. Trump or Mr. Obama before them. The people who control our government are the ones that profiteer from making, selling weapons. Now, to do that, you need an enemy. You need tension. I mean, I don't always agree with what the Pope says, but even he, when he stood up before Congress a couple of years ago and said, look, the main problem here is the blood-drenched arms traders. Whoa! And all the congressmen and senators got up and clapped. And, oh, yeah. And then they looked into their vest pockets to see if the latest envelope with cash was there from Raytheon or the one from Lockheed. I mean, it was giving hypocrisy a bad name. What I have coined is an expression called the Mickey Mat. It rhymes with Mickey Mouse, okay? It's like what Eisenhower warned about. He warned about the military-industrial complex. It's worse now. If you have a pencil, take this down. It's the military-industrial congressional intelligence media academia think tank complex, Mickey Man. Why do I mention that? Well, those are the people who are insisting on sanctions. Those are the people who are actually creating more acrimony, not only with Russia, but with China. Those are the people that don't seem to be aware of the dangers of an armed confrontation. Those are the people, the Ivy League people, who, just like the ones that got us into the war in Vietnam, know best because they're the best and the brightest, and they're wet behind the ears. I refer specifically to our Secretary of State, Tony Blinken. I don't think he has a clue as to what the world is like. So these are real problems. The other one, of course, the one that contributes to all this, are the crazy generals, okay? Now, when I say crazy generals, I mean like the head of SAC, or what used to be called the Strategic Air Command, now it's STRATCOM. Now he's saying publicly, we have to allow for the possibility, it's a real possibility of nuclear war. We have these small nuclear weapons and we go, hello? Why is he allowed to say those things? Does he really believe those things? And if push comes to shove, would he use those things even without explicit approval from the President of the United States? I don't know any of the answers to this, but if I were Mr. Putin, I would be very, very worried about the real forces that are in control. And the last thing I'll say on this is when Mr. Biden was mousetrapped by one of these Ivy Leaguers, Columbia University, George Stephanopoulos, you think Mr. Putin's a killer? Oh yeah, I guess he's a killer. Well, that was just an example here of how they would get Biden to say things that, when on second thought, he might not want to say. And I would just end by saying Mr. Putin's reaction to that, if any of you remember, is this, Mr. Biden, будь здоров, be healthy. Now, I think, and this is my interpretation, that this was a nice way of saying, look, you ought to come to your senses. You ought to be healthy in mind as well as body, and be aware of these people around you that are trying to cause a conflagration, not even intending that, by the way they stoke the arms trade, by the way they continue to build up NATO and their forces in the East against China. This is what is in control here. I think the Kremlin knows that quite well, not only from Biden, but from his predecessors as well.
David, excuse me.
Yes,
David?
go ahead, Vladimir.
Yeah. May I add my personal suggestion to your question we have already answered? My personal suggestion is, if the summit we are talking about is imminent and it will take place, that's fine. If it is not, let's create our own summit between ourselves and produce the declaration of that public opinion summit to our two leaders, Mr. Putin and Mr. Joseph Biden.
Excellent.
I mean, summit of the NGOs, American and Russian. But before this proposed summit actually takes place, for example, in the future, could it be in June or July? I don't know. Oh, well, preparations not are underway, and we are still waiting for the details, what is going to be tackled. Though general agenda has been already mapped out and articulated. So, public opinion summit with our ideas, with our suggestions and proposals. It should not be stockpiled with all issues, but the most urgent, the most important, the most burning, knocking our doors day in, day out. Thank you.
Let me interject here, if I may, David. I think that's a great idea. Am I audible here?
Yes.
I am. Okay. I think it's a great idea. The only problem is that you are talking to a minuscule representation of the American people. Most Americans don't know what's going on. The latest Gallup poll indicates that an unfavorable view of Russia is held by 77% of the American people. Unfavorable view of China, 79% of the American people. Why? Very easy. The cornerstone of the Mickey Mat, remember I said media? It's the media. And so what we need to do is find some way to expose what the media is doing in stoking this anti-Russian and anti-Chinese sentiment. Here's a case in point. Tomorrow is the first anniversary, a whole year since it was revealed that the head of the cyber firm looking into the Democratic National Committee email fiasco testified under oath that there was no evidence of exfiltration, layman's word, hacking, by Russia or by anyone else. That testimony was on December 5th, 2017. It was hidden for 2.5 years while Mueller and the others did their thing. And finally, the head of the Intelligence Committee in the House was forced to release that testimony on May 7th, 2020, exactly 1 year ago. What's my point? Who knows about that? Nobody who reads the New York Times knows about that. Nobody knows anything about, nobody who relies on the mainstream media knows about that. We know about that. I'm going to write a little piece for tomorrow on the first anniversary. But this whole Russia Gate thing was based on the notion that the Russians hacked into the 2016 election. The FBI deferred the investigation to this CrowdStrike group. CrowdStrike says, we looked, we tried, we found no technical evidence that anybody hacked into the DNC. That needs to be exposed. Then maybe people will say, hey, we've been had here. We've been fed a story to stoke up hostility toward Russia and to China and to fatten the people who profiteer on the arms trade.
Ray, I want to ask Vladimir about this question and then see if he wants to ask you a question or you him a question before we take the dozens of questions that are piling up in the chat and the hands that are being raised and fit at least a few of them in. And Vladimir, I wonder if you have anything you can tell us about what the people in Russia think about the crazy things that the people in the United States think. We sent out an email to peace activists promoting this webinar and got plenty of responses saying, I will not have anything to do with a country that's run by Vladimir Putin, who installed Donald Trump as president of the United States and abuses the leader of the Russian people, Mr. Navalny, and so forth. Do people in Russia know what people in the United States think reality looks like, and what do they think of that?
I do not remember public opinion poll, but what I have gathered from various public opinion poll organizations working in the Russian Federation, the number of persons who regard the Americans in positive way decreased, unfortunately decreased, but not very much, because we differentiate from the ruling elite, from persons who are masters of the ceremonies and rank and file people, academic community, journalists, and experts, etc., who are not biased, who would like to know the realities, who would like to find proper solutions proper way out of the stalemate we are still having in front of us. So in the past, the number of such pro-Americans, Russians, have been very high, especially when we signed a number of arms control treaties and agreements, like Ray has already mentioned, SALT, strategic arms limitation talks, and strategic arms reduction talks, then incidents at sea prevention agreement, then Vienna confidence building measures like CFE Treaty 1 and 1A, etc., and many others like Open Sky, like ABM Treaty. Well, the doomsday clock moved the other way around. 15 minutes before midnight, there was a nice graphical feature, graphical reaction that the world sighed with relief. At least Washington and Moscow have agreed about something. They reduced their nuclear capabilities, etc., etc. They wanted to make space as a peaceful domain. But nowadays, unfortunately, especially we feel embarrassed and insulted when we are having these irrational, illegal sanctions and restrictions. If I'm not mistaken, we have already have sanctions against 530 Russian enterprises, firms, and companies, and against 300 individuals. I'm not on the list. Yes, but nevertheless, the majority of Russians would like to have permanent, sustained relationship, positive relationship with the Americans, be they presidents, prime ministers, secretary of states, secretary of defense, and naturally American rank and file people. I have visited the United States before it was easy to go 7 times, and I have very good reminiscences with the civilian Americans and military Americans. Because soon after the demise of the Soviet Union in 1991, I visited the United States of America exactly for the INC review conferences, or Incidents and Sea Prevention Agreement review conferences. And I have visited a lot of military installations, command and control centers in the United States. The Americans visited ours on the basis of reciprocity. And I was rejoicing and very happy when I saw that military people are talking to us a friendly way, narrating anecdotes, dancing, drinking, joking, etc., etc. Wonderful. Let's restore the same kind of atmosphere. Thank you.
Let's go super quickly to Ray, and then to the first person waiting to ask a question with their hand raised, and then to the first question from the chat. Go ahead, Ray.
Just 2 things briefly. The Prevention of Incidents at Sea Treaty was signed in 1972 at the same time as the SALT I Treaty. I was there in Moscow. I saw Senator Warner, who was the head of the delegation. I gave him my seat at the Bolshoi, as a matter of fact. These were more than just a couple of agreements. And I'm glad to hear that Vladimir has been invited back to reassess these things and update them. I hope that continues. What I really want to say here is that Vladimir is using ruling circles, elite circles, elite leaders. And that smacks of the old Soviet terminology. And I want to say that I understand now why that is so constant. And let me explain. When my job in the 60s and 70s was to look at Russian or Soviet propaganda, I sometimes was amused at how egregious it was. There was one phrase, get this, Wall Streetskie kravatiцы, Wall Street bloodsuckers. And I used to say, oh, come on, that's over the top. And then 2008 and 2009 happened. And I saw that, whoa, Volsritsky kravatiцы was just about the right term for what happened to our economy and for those people who were damaged so drastically by what happened. And so ruling circles is exactly right. We are ruled by ruling circles represented by the Mickey mat that I explained before. And I noticed that the Kremlin uses this again. And it should be no disadvantage for those of us who want to talk about the real situation in our country to say that we are indeed run by the ruling circles, not least of which are the Wall Street bloodsuckers. Amen.
Thank you, Ray. You and Vladimir have generated a flood of questions in the chat, and I see many hands raised. Leah Bulger, would you like to call on the first person with a raised hand?
Yes, absolutely. And just before I call on the first person, I just remind everybody, please make your questions very brief so we can get as many in as possible. Thank you. Mm-hmm. Joseph Gerson, You can ask your question. You can unmute yourself and ask your question. There you go.
Thank you. So my question is for Ray, recognizing that Biden is the spokesperson for the ruling circle here, even if we have competing ruling circles, how would you describe his ambitions in relationship to Russia? What is he looking to achieve in relationship to greater control over Russia, pushing NATO further to the east? What do you think his ambitions are?
Well, it's hard to read another person's mind. I'm afraid that Biden is as uneducated as most other ruling circles with respect to Russian history and what Russia did and went through in World War II, and how we used to be allies, and that there's no reason in God's heaven why we couldn't be allies once again. I don't know whether Biden believes what he says about Russia or whether he's just mouthing what he's told. It really doesn't matter. The effect is the same. And, I would hope, or I had hope, that Biden, being almost as old as I am, for God's sake, he's 3 years younger than me, but it's going to be one term, almost certainly. Why couldn't he possibly be free to do the right thing? And that's why I think the climate change proposal is not extraordinary. It's possible. Why couldn't he say, well, look, let me look at these facts really. And I don't know if he's capable of doing that. I'm meandering here, but it's a real tough question. It's always the predicament trying to figure out how much of this stuff they believe about the Russian menace and how much they use for political gain and for stoking hatred and stoking tension, thereby to satisfy the Volstrytskie kravatiцы and the arms trade.
Let's go to a question from the chat, and then we'll go back to a raised hand, and I will answer several questions about, can you share Ray's slides and Vladimir's slides? We will ask both of them whether we can email you links after this is over to their presentations, and if no one objects in the chat, we will also email you the chat with it, which is getting chock full of resources and links from all of you good people. Vladimir, just to return to this briefly, I don't think you spoke to it. Numerous people in the chat would love to know whether Mr. Navalny is the buffoon who makes videos where he pretends to shoot immigrants and has the support of 5% of Russia, or is the legitimate leader of the entire Russian people who is being abused by this petty tyrant in office in Moscow, or something in between?
Yeah. Well, thank you very much. It's a very good question. And I would like to correct, he's being backed not by 5% of the Russians, but only by 2% of the Russians, but not from the entire population. 2% of the persons who have been asked to express their attitude towards Mr. Alexei Navalny. So in absolute figures, about 15,000 persons donated voluntarily their money into Mr. Navalny's fund to combat, to fight corruption, it's called in Russian. So 15,000 only. What we do not like in Mr. Navalny, first of all, he was convicted by the court, no, not by the press or not by his ill wishes, but by the court, with barrister and with even foreign diplomats present in the courtroom. He was convicted in money laundering, in bribery, and stealing money from a foreign company. He has got more than 3 years in prison, but on probation initially. But he violated this kind of probation many, many times. And only when just he violated this kind of probation imprisonment, I mean, actually on the house, sitting under house arrest, not behind the bars, he was convicted to stay in prison. The second negative feature of Mr. Navalny is that during the trial, he personally insulted in a very bad manner the Second World War veteran, a very old daddy, for his decorations, for his medals, and for his role in fighting Nazi Germany. The third setback Mr. Navalny has done, he initiated teenagers to come to the streets of Moscow and other big cities of the Great Russia to support his ideas and his policy. Kids, it's a very bad manner to manipulate youngsters, teenagers, using as a political tool against power. If you wish to get power, persuade people that you are smarter, clever, can produce better economic and social program than the existing elite. Go ahead. And number 4, being in prison, he has protected himself as not treated very well, either very ill, sick, etc. But when physicians are coming and examine him, he was just physically fit, a normal person. So just imagine if we, for example, select any person in the West or in the United States exactly, who has been convicted in embezzlement and money laundering, fraud, etc., and demand from the US government to release him immediately. He is a freedom fighter. He is a person who is fighting for democracy. You will never release such person who has been convicted by the court ruling. Mr. Navalny is a criminal, and he should stay in prison the term he has got. Full stop. Thank you.
Let's go to another hand raiser, Leah.
Yes, excuse me, Mike Goodman, you can unmute yourself and ask your question.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, one of my specific areas of interest and concern is the CIA itself and what we as citizens can do to ensure greater accountability for the CIA. Because of my limited familiarity with the agency, I'm convinced that that is the most most serious obstacle to any type of progressive movement along the lines that we're discussing here. And so what can we as citizens do specifically with regard to the CIA? I suspect not very much, and I think that's part of the problem that we're dealing with. Thanks.
Ray, want to speak to that?
Sure, yeah. During the 70s, CIA abuses galore or disclosed by the hearings, the church committee hearings. And oversight committees were set up in the Congress, Senate, and House to ride herd, to exercise oversight over CIA activities. It worked for a while. Now it is a joke, a very sad joke. Oversight? Now, the oversight committees have become the overlook committees. They're all afraid. Afraid of what? Well, to be very crass about it, they know that the intelligence community has a copy of every email, every telephone call that they ever made. It's just as bad as it was before the 70s, and no one wants to take any chances that they will be discredited by our friendly security services. In other words, when I say intelligence as part of the MICI media academia think tank, I mean that intelligence is playing a major role here, if only by intimidating the very committees that are supposed to be overseeing their work into silence. And so they're pretty much unrestrained, and even the president is not fully informed of what they're doing.
Were they perfect in the 70s, Ray, or just better than now?
Well, the 70s divulged things that were just abhorrent, and laws were in place. 78, the FISA, the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, was put in place. But, you know, I'll be very trite here. Most Americans know how to complete this sentence. After 9/11, everything changed, right? And so, you know, I confronted Robert Mueller himself when he had just left being head of the FBI. And I asked about the practices like parallel construction and other things that they were doing against the Fourth Amendment. And he looked down at me. He's a big guy. He looked down and said, Mr. McGovern, we were given special authorities after 9/11. Well, special authorities in contravention of the Fourth and the First and Sixth and the Fifth Amendments, well, that's what's become. And as I say, the only curb on this, and there are a couple of good senators like Senator Wyden out there in Oregon. So there is a construction suggestion here, Michael, and that is, if you have a senator or a representative on one of the intelligence communities, do everything you can to get them to sign up to their responsibilities. And if they don't do that, expose them for the frauds that they are.
There's a question in the chat, Vladimir, maybe you could answer. What does Russia spend on militarism, and how does it compare to what the United States and other countries spend?
Yes, I understand. Well, thank you very much. But David, frankly speaking, we will never use militarism when we count our military expenditures or military burden. What is the difference between expenditures and military burden? Military expenditures in terms of GDP. So we are quite a modest nuclear power or great power. Having, according to the recent SIPRI, Stockholm Peace Research Institute figures or records, we're having slightly more than 60 billion US dollars in terms of US dollars only, while the People's Republic of China has spent last year more than 230 billion US dollars, and the United States much more. So we are quite happy that we are not spending too much on our military, simply because our military hardware cost us not much, not so high than the United States of America and in some NATO countries. We do not have 800 military installations, bases, command and control posts, operational centers like the United States of America has all over the world. We do not spend. Only just 4 military bases in the neighboring former Soviet republics with the agreement. And we do not deploy tactical nuclear weapons of the Russian Federation outside our territory. The United States of America has deployed already in 5 countries, 4 European and 1 Asia, Turkey. We do not have land-based missile defense operational bases anywhere, only on our territory or on ships, which is not prohibited, by the way, under International Sea Law Convention. So that's why we are happy that our government first spent not too much money on military, for military budget, and we are happy that we are not spending too less on military budgets. So it's quite rational, defensive-oriented policy, because our nuclear strategy is conditional, defensive nuclear strategy. Conditional, if we are attacked. Defensive, if we are attacked. If we are not attacked, we are not attacked now, and we sitting comfortably, doing nothing. That's it. So, no, this military burdens should be blown up exponentially, very high, enormously. Otherwise, they will ruin civilian branch, civilian industrial sector, healthcare, education, etc., etc., etc. So, should be very careful balance. But better to reduce military expenditures via reaching better understanding between Washington and Moscow.
There are a lot of people in the United States, Vladimir, who want the US government to make a statement that it will not engage in the first use of nuclear weapons as sort of the tiniest thing that you could ask of them, you know, when what we really want is to abolish the nuclear weapons. Has Russia made such a statement?
Look, the first statement on no first use or no first strike took place in the former Soviet Union in 1983. Then we repeatedly reiterated the same kind of proposition. But after the demise of the Soviet Union, the Russian Federation somehow has forgotten about this notion. But I would like not to advertise myself, but I would like to tell you frankly that a decade ago, I suggested this kind of notion to be implemented because it is the most easiest thing to do. It does not destroy nuclear arms if someone would like to retain them as a deterrence capability. It will erode gradually the existence of nuclear weapons if a country producing nuclear weapons and intending to use it will understand that why to produce more nuclear warheads and more delivery systems if we do not use it at all. At all. Not during the first strike, not during the second or third, etc. strikes. So it's the number one point I think should be in the front in the front line of the agenda of between President Biden and President Putin if they meet for the constructive dialogue. If not, I am very happy that a number of U.S. Lawmakers, the U.S. Congress, Adam Smith and Madam Elizabeth Warren, and earlier Congressman Ted Lieu, suggested to put forward no first use act at the Congress. I know that Mr. Joseph Trump was completely against it. Barack Obama welcomed this idea, but his NATO allies and cronies and pals decided better not to implement it, simply because it will undermine, as they put it, the extended nuclear deterrence strategy.
Yeah.
But nowadays, it's the only solution as a starting point to ameliorate military political situation globally and bilaterally.
Well,
No
with
first use.
pals like NATO, who needs enemies? Leah, you want to take another question?
I think Ray wanted to follow up there. Go ahead, Ray.
Go ahead.
Just briefly, I think we need to continue the comparison between what Russia and China spend on their military and what the United States does. You heard the figures that Vladimir adduced. Americans, I hope, already know that the U.S. military budget for last year was what, $754 billion. Okay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yes.
If you count the nuclear stuff that is under the Energy Department of Energy budget, you're over $1 trillion. $1 trillion as compared with below 100 billion for Russia and 200 billion for China. So that's important. The second thing I would say is, hey, Russia doesn't have F-35 fighter bombers. And Russia is just happy about that because they don't work. They don't work. How much money have we already invested in F-35s? Almost 2 trillion. Trillion T, okay, as in T. They don't work. Even Adam Smith, the guy who heads that committee, says we ought to sack the whole thing. That's number one. The last one is simply this. How about these ABM things? They'll never work. We told President Reagan, you can't devise a system that will protect you completely from attack using ABM stuff. So why do we do it? Well, Putin asked our former ambassador to the Soviet Union and Russia at a Valdai conference. He said, why do you keep doing this? And he forgot his diplomatic experience. And he said, well, actually, you should realize it's a jobs program. But Putin looked and said, a jobs program? He said, don't you have something better to spend your money on, like medical science, like preventing the outbreak of mass sickness and all that stuff? So Putin rose to that occasion. The ambassador was embarrassed, but it is a jobs program, but not for people like us, but for the high-tech people and the CEOs who make 300 times as much as the people working for them. So it is a jobs program. It's in various states and it's hard to stop, but we have to stop it. And we can, because military expenditures can be converted to civilian uses very easily, and the jobs would stay.
And it's important, I think, Ray, just to note that it isn't, that it's a lie, that military spending actually eliminates jobs. That if you spend the same money on education or infrastructure or green energy, or even never tax it from working people in the first place, you have more jobs. So it actually creates fewer jobs, not more jobs. I also think it's worth adding that, while people like to compare military spending and GDP as if whoever's got more money simply should have more wars, I like to compare military spending per capita. And it's worth noting that Russia spends about $400 every year for every man, woman, and child in Russia on war preparations. The United States spends well over $2,000 for every man, woman, and child in the United States, and it's a big difference. Leah.
Yes. So our next question will come from Manfred Grohl. You can unmute yourself, Manfred, and ask your question.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you very much. I appreciate the excellent analysis of the two speakers. And what I want to ask them is whether one point should be more considered. I mean, I felt a certain optimistic view what could be done if people of goodwill, etc., would work together. But under the prevailing imperialistic, Western imperialistic system, Is that possible at all? I mean, we have to recognize that the Western imperial powers, the United States in front, NATO under supervision of the United States, Europe, Germany, they want to rule the world. And this includes to keep Russia and China as regions which can be exploited. I mean, China has been in a semi-colonial state for a long time, has been completely ruined. Russia was in this situation for a shorter time after the breakdown of the Soviet Union before Putin came to power. And I just remember to the German history, I mean, the German imperialist capitalist class wanted to have world supremacy 2 times. They tried it 2 times. They got a bloody nose, but that's not important. Well, if you take both world wars together, over 100 million people were killed. And after the Second World War, we are in a permanent low-level world war with as many people killed as in the 2 world wars before.
Manfred, I think we need to finish your question there and let the gentleman respond. Thank you.
And so under this premise, do you think it's not immediately extremely important to work for a change of these imperialist systems? That this is the point.
Thank you.
Who wants to speak to that?
Go ahead, Ray.
Yeah, I would just say that I think the key is the fact that 76 years after the Russians and the US, Great Britain, France, and others defeated the Nazis, the West Europeans still are feeling that they have to salute every time Washington says, "Attention." Now that's going to change. I am embarrassed at how long it takes that to change, but I'll tell you one vignette. About 5 years ago, I was in Berlin. I was in the office of the head of the Verteidigungsausschuss, the defense committee of the Bundestag, and Anaconda exercise, Anaconda, the snake exercise, had just begun with NATO forces, the biggest exercise up till that time in the area opposite the Russia. And so I said to this fellow, his name was Helmich, I said, "What about this exercise that started today?" And he looked really dour and he said, we don't really, I don't think that's a good idea. And I said, "Why are your Bundeswehr troops involved in it?" And he threw up his hands and it's embarrassing to people who know which end is up, but the embarrassment has not overcome the slavish devotion to what the US wants. One bright light here is that Nord Stream 2, the gas and oil pipeline coming from Russia into Germany, which will be a boon to everyone concerned. The US is trying to prevent that. It's 95% complete. It's not going to be prevented. And maybe when the German firms become even more sanctioned because of this, they'll come to their senses and said, who needs a great power and indestructible, exceptional power of this kind?
Thank you, Ray. By the way, if anyone is not muted and can mute, please do so. Let me direct a related question from the chat, or a couple of them, to Vladimir. Can you talk about Russia's Eurasian Cooperative Economic Project, Russia working with Europe and Asia, and do you think Russia will sanction EU representatives?
Oh, yes. We will sanction EU representatives because they twice in March, last March, have imposed sanctions against Russia for Mr. Navalny's case, and second for amassing troops near the Ukrainian border. Why they have not imposed sanctions against 26 NATO member countries who are going to be involved in Defender Europe gross military exercises that will last several months from now. So we will reciprocate naturally, because we're not the first who have done it. So we have to reciprocate. It's a gentleman's, a knight's response to any attacker, be it economic or military or physical or mental, etc., etc. So better not to attack us either by sanctions or by military might, because we have already suffered a lot of wars. For example, with Turkey, we have already had 13 different types of wars on land and at sea. And with many other countries who wanted to dismember the Russian Empire, to dismember the Russian Federation, etc., etc., and suffered a lot of losses during the Second World War and during the First World War. So that's why we have to be very vigilant, and we do not show our left cheek if we have been slammed by the right cheek. We will always respond. That's the key feature of the Russians. So the idea is better not to insult us, better not to attack us. You will have a boomerang effect. That's it. But it will be not necessarily symmetrical. It could be asymmetrical. Full stop.
Leah, want to call on somebody?
Yes, the next questioner is Donald Jordan. If you can unmute yourself and ask your question. There you go.
Yeah, sorry about that. Good evening from Helsinki. I'm an American who has lived in Finland for 21 years. And living in Helsinki, we have the Finnish government here. And the Finnish government has been very pro-West and pro-NATO, despite 80% of the population in Finland against the joining of NATO. What impact would it make for Russia if Finland does join NATO and buy those rotten F-35s? And I just want to add one more question for Ray and Vladimir. Would they be interested in speaking to the Finnish government at some point? Thank you.
Ray, and then by myself.
Well, I'd be interested in speaking to any government. My own government's not interested in hearing what I want to say. You know, when the Berlin Wall fell and when the Soviet Union fell apart, George H.W. Bush, to his credit, sent his Secretary of State to talk with Gorbachev and with Shevardnadze. And they said, look, we don't want to dance on the Berlin Wall, Bush's phrase. We don't want to take advantage of you in Central Europe. Let's do this. Let's have a reunited Germany. The whole point of NATO was to prevent a reunited Germany, to keep the Americans in and the Russians out. I spent 5 years in Germany. That didn't sound like a good idea to me, okay? And think about the Russians. 26 million people killed during World War II. 36 million. How many US? Maybe 400,000 soldiers, okay? So here's Gorbachev and Shevardnadze asked to swallow this bitter pill. And you know what? James Baker, a lawyer, said, look, how about this? We will not move NATO 1 inch to the east toward Russia if you let reunited Germany take place. If you take out your 20 divisions from East Germany, and we'll all be a happy, comfortable Central Europe. Well, that seemed like a good idea, and they bought it. Clinton came into office in 1996, and he said, I think I'd get a lot of immigrant votes if I said we could incorporate Czechoslovakia or the Czech Republic or Poland or Hungary or into NATO. And they said, well, we promised not to do that. And he said, where's the promise? Well, it wasn't written down. So Clinton's a lawyer. He says, not written down. We'll get it important. Now, long story short, NATO has more than doubled in size, and all those extra countries are at least 1 inch to the east of East Germany. So the Germans feel, or the Russians feel, a little bit kind of tricked by that. The last thing I'll say is we can go back to the right after World War II years. Now, I was in Moscow on the 25th of April 5 years ago when we were celebrating the meeting on the Elbe, when Russian forces, Soviet forces, and American forces met for this joyful reunion just about a week before the war ended, all right? Now, we planted a tree, we did other things. But when I talked to this very tall Soviet general in uniform still, 90 years old, and I told him where I came from, he said, Studebaker, 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 Studebaker. Now, the younger of you won't know what he's talking about. But Franklin Roosevelt turned over a whole factory, Studebaker factory, to manufacturing trucks and other armored personnel carriers for Russia to give to them to help them beat the Nazis. And this is all this general could remember, Studebaker, Studebaker, Studebaker. Well, we can get back to that Studebaker era. We just have to get away from this business about building more and more arms and profiteering on arms sales.
Glad he didn't mention Ford or General Motors, whose history in that era might not have been as positive. I want to note that we're over the time allotted for this, but there are a lot of people here and a lot of questions. So if everyone's okay, we continue a little bit further. One of the many questions, and there's no way.
David, Vladimir has his hand raised.
Because sorry, David, because the question was directed to me as well concerning Russia's potential response if Finland becomes full-fledged NATO member states. The answer would be negative. We will be very much upset because we have noticed that all countries, our neighbors or former Soviet republics, when they joined NATO alliance, anti-Russian sentiments increased. Military bases, military installations of NATO in those countries also increased. Dual capable aircraft appeared on the territory of Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia, very close to St. Petersburg, the Republic of Belarus, our immediate neighbor and friend. So we will be very much upset and unhappy. Not military alliances, creation of military alliances is the future of the earth. Dismantling military alliances, dismantling unnecessary military alliances who cultivate nationalism, militarism, enormous spending of money on military hardware, on regional conflicts, etc., etc. And we will be very much upset if Kiev will knock the door to be a full-fledged member of the alliance. Yes. Because the current Kiev regime openly says, and Polish authorities would like to back Kiev's intention to become a member of the transatlantic alliance. So that's not very good. That will undermine, willingly or unwillingly, the European security equilibrium and European security balance. That's it. I have served in Finland for many years ago, and Finnish mass media put the same question to me. I was a senior counselor at the Russian embassy in Helsinki, and I was asked the same question by the Finnish journalists, and I answered the same way as I have done. And unfortunately, the reaction of the nationalistic press of Finland, and the press who would like to see Helsinki as a transatlantic member was very negative. They said Kozin does not have any right to speak against Finland admission to NATO. But what they have suggested, that I have the right to speak in favor of Finland to be a NATO member by 100%. Never. That's my personal feeling. It doesn't matter. Where I in the civil service, at the diplomatic service, or retired diplomat, or nothing, or janitor, for example, somewhere in the street. That's my feeling. NATO should not be enlarged. It will bring us nowhere, unfortunately. Thank you.
Let's see if we can maybe take one more question for both of you from the chat, and then one more from a raised hand. I would just note today's New York Times reports that the UK and France are both sending warships to fight over an island called Jersey. I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, Ray and Vladimir, if they go to war, every NATO member will be obliged by law to attack both of them, and then to attack each other NATO member that attacked either of them. So maybe military alliances are not the grandest idea ever devised by the human mind. Let me just put a set of questions to you that are in the chat. What can ordinary people do? What can citizen diplomacy do? Can sister cities and such alliances help? Can we do more public events? What creative ideas can you all offer beyond those you've already suggested?
Mm-hmm.
Who wants to go first?
Yeah, shall I? Okay. Vladimir. Yes, we shall have our communications and our conversations the way we have done. If we succeed, people will support us. If we fail, they will criticize us. Let's first check it out, whether we all have been capable to satisfy dreams and ideas of rank and file people across the Atlantic in the United States of America and in the Russian Federation. But if we just were quite smart guys and smart girls, so we have to continue our efforts, because to sit idle with our hands going down or sleeping on the sofa, you will never change the world. You will never change a dramatic situation we are confronting each day. Day in, day out. Yes, thank you.
Let me say amen to that, Vladimir. I think you're exactly right. And let me adduce a for instance. We use for instances in the Bronx. Harvard Business School talks about case studies. Here's a for instance. Early September 2013, every single one of Obama's advisors was telling him, you've got to strike out with US military forces, missiles, and so forth against Syria. Why? Because of a false flag attack with sarin outside Damascus on the 21st of August, 2013. Obama resisted doing that, okay? Now it was touch and go. Obama said, I think I'd like to get congressional views on this. Whoa! Congress, of course, has the power to declare war, not the president. And during that time, and this is the point of this remark, during that time, senators and representatives were home, and peace advocates like David Swanson and all the other people that were associated with were banging at their doors saying, no war on Syria. We don't want a war on Syria. And Congress, even though led by Volstrytsky Kravapitsi, were listening. And Obama resisted it. And he bragged about it later. He said, everyone wanted me to go by the Washington playbook. But then I found out from the head of national intelligence that this false flag sarin attack outside Damascus was not what everybody was saying it was. And so I resisted that. And who bailed me out? Anybody know? Well, Vladimir Putin had invited Mr. Obama to have private talks in connection with a summit in St. Petersburg. And Mr. Putin said, hey, Mr. Obama, do you remember when we met in Northern Ireland, we set up this committee to look at how we could get rid of Syrian chemical weapons to the degree they still exist? Obama says, yeah. He said, what persuaded the Syrians to get rid of them all under UN supervision on, if you're willing, US warships specifically outfitted to destroy chemical weapons? What do you think? Obama said, really? Kerry never told me about that. Okay. Well, it was real. The next day, the Syrian foreign minister announced the agreement, and Obama was let off the hook. He didn't have to start a war. They destroyed all those weapons. It's clear that they were destroyed. The UN inspections verified that. So what am I saying here? I'm saying that a statesman can step up to the plate and do the right thing if he has enough public support. There were people in the streets, big time, okay? You people. And if he has the kind of help from, I would say, statesmen like Vladimir Vladimirovich Putin, who rose to the occasion and said, look, you don't need to start a war, Mr. President. Here's how you can get out of it. This is a lesson that you won't learn from the New York Times. Check it out. It's fact.
Thank you, Ray. Leah, you want to call on one more person?
Yes, finally we get a question from a woman, Ann Batiza, and I just want everybody to know I've been asking and calling on people in the order that they raise their hand. So to be fair, go ahead, Ann.
Well, thank you very much for allowing me to ask my question, and hello to Ray, and it's nice to meet you, Vladimir. My question has to do with how do we break through the mainstream media propaganda hold on the American people? Ray said that 80% of the people in the US, and I can attest to that even this morning, have a negative view of both Russia and China. Unfortunately, they have a negative view of Julian Assange, who is the anti-war activist of all time. And we have some media people like Matt Taibbi, Aaron Mate, Glenn Greenwald, Max Blumenthal, who are trying to break through. But they don't seem to get much traction because we're just in this flood of propaganda. I want to make one suggestion, is that every NGO that's on this call, if you are talking about any of your particular issues, talk about how the media is distorting whatever it is that you're trying to achieve and break through. But Ray, I want to know in particular from you, what can we do to break through the propaganda? Thank you.
Short answer, I've been trying for 20 years. I don't know. It is the problem. I mean, I have very good friends, highly educated, who think that when they read the New York Times, they're getting all the news that's fit to print in an unadulterated way. So I'm out of ideas, and that's why I would appeal to listeners and viewers here. Give me a new idea. We've been trying real hard to do this. How you break in is beyond me. Maybe I'm too old to be imaginative enough. Please help.
Vladimir, did you want to speak to this question?
Yeah, yes. Well, as to myself, in the Russian Federation, well, I have a direct access to mass media, through TV show, through my publications, articles and commentaries over the radio or on TV, publishing monographs. You have said during the introduction session. So it's not a problem at all, but it is very difficult to talk to people living in the United States of America, because in my career, I sent a publication and made a publication at the Washington Post, a newspaper during Barack Obama's presidency on arms control between Moscow and Washington. It was the first experience. It was quite good. Also made some publications for the Moscow Times when they just gave me the green light and were happy to have my articles. They published too many, I think. But what I'm doing right now, I translate by myself all my monographs that appear in Russian. I translate and publish into English. And I can share all my books with my fellow Americans, my colleagues and friends in the United States of America. Absolutely no problem from myself.
Well, thank you for that, and I hope you can let us know anything we can do to help share your books and spread the word about your books. Maybe we can get very brief closing remarks, if any, from Ray and from Vladimir. And I would just say very quickly to that last question that while I watch the U.S. corporate media get worse and worse and worse, I've seen it get better, slightly better on certain specific things, including issues related to Black Lives Matter. And I ask myself why, and I say, well, massive protests, disruptive protests, interruptions of prestigious, important people not giving a damn because it's too important, and videos of horrors. So get your hands on videos of the victims of the missiles, of the victims of the tanks, of the victims of the bombs and the guns and the invasions and the occupations and the interventions, and disrupt what's going on virtually or real world with your demands. Follow the lessons of what seems to work. Ray, do you have any brief closing comments?
Nothing other than to thank the organizers of this really interesting little program. This in itself, I think, will help go some ways toward educating American people. The challenge, as I see it, is to find ways to educate more than the choir. In other words, more than most of the people who are likely to have tuned into this. And that's really up to each and every one of us. As for activism, well, I like Alice Walker's description of her activism. She described it as my rent for having a place to live on this planet. I think we all need to be activists. I really do think that activism helped prevent a really bad war, a worse war on Syria in September 2013. And I would cite that as for instance, a case study as to how people can get out in the street, how people can contact their congressman. So I guess the last thing is just not to give up. We're not supposed to be successful necessarily. Results are not unimportant, but they're secondary. They're secondary to the act that we do. The act that we do is to tell the truth. And in the end, the truth will keep us free.
Wonderful. Thank you, Ray. McGovern. Vladimir.
Yes, I'm also very grateful for a wonderful opportunity to address the esteemed audience. And thank you very much, organizers, for such a terrific event. I think it's my humble opinion that such experiment should be continued in the future as well, in the long run and in the short run. And we have to tackle the acute, the very important issues we are facing today and in the future, especially in the arms control, in the strategic stability. And some people I have noticed asked a question whether it is possible to share my PowerPoint presentation. Please, David, yes, send them all to those who so desire. And share, please, my email address. I can also send and to be in communication. Nevertheless, I'm approaching 73 very soon, but I have enthusiasm still. So Musa is visiting me, Musa of creativity and Musa of enthusiasm is helping me to continue with my endeavors, my actions. So rely upon me absolutely freely. Do not hesitate. I always admire of having contacts with people. Better directly, better sitting at the one table. But unfortunately, due to well-known reasons, we can communicate indirectly via internet, via Zoom, etc. But nevertheless, it's also very helpful. I wish every person sitting on the opposite side in front of me or sitting somewhere in many corners of the United States and elsewhere in the world, be healthy, take care, keep yourself strong, be committed to positive deeds and make our world safer, clean, sound, beautiful, and loved. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Vladimir. Very well said. Thank you to Vladimir Kozin, to Ray McGovern. We will indeed email all of you and everyone who signed up for this event and didn't make it the video of this event to share far and wide, and the PowerPoints and how to contact our speakers and the chat that was produced during the course of this event. Thank you also to Leah Bolger for helping out, and to World Beyond War, and to this wonderful organization that helped put this together, the Center for Citizen Initiatives, and Sharon Tennyson. This is a group you need to find out about if you haven't already. Leah and I and some of the rest of you have gone on trips to Russia and met Vladimir because of Center for Citizen Initiatives. So thank you. Keep in touch. Keep up the great work. Let's make peace in the world.